Welcome to Stories with Traction, unedited and unfiltered. These are real conversations with leaders who have walked through trials and triumph. In a world of AI-polished sound bites and scripted perfection, this podcast isn't about being flawless. It's about being purposeful. I'm your host, Matt Zahn. We're going to find out what drives these leaders, what's their story, and how can we learn from their experiences. Get inspired and enjoy Stories with Traction. I am so excited for this conversation because today I'm joined by David Nast. David is the CEO and managing partner of Nast Partners. He uses artificial intelligence, workforce analytics, and science-backed data to help businesses stop guessing and erase bias in their talent and execution decisions. In addition, he's a three-time CEO, a workplace behavioral expert, and an award-winning business coach with over 30 years of experience in human capital, leadership development, executive coaching, and much, much more. Welcome to Stories with Traction, David.
Thank you, Matt. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're incredibly busy, so I will just dive right in because I'm really excited to get to your story. You have a very unique story from other business leaders that I've spoken with, so I'm excited to dive into that piece. But before we talk and unpack elements of your story, I want to talk about today, the here and now. So take my audience through kind of a visual of what you do on a day-to-day basis, what you're into, what coaching looks like to you.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So I wake up, I meditate, I eat, I come upstairs, I write for about an hour or so, and then I exercise, take a shower, and I start my day. And that's usually around, get all that done before 8 and 9 o'clock. When it comes to coaching, I approach coaching. Every single person is perfect as they are. I don't need to fix them. We're not doing therapy. We're not doing elongated autopsies on stuff. It's very, very future focused. So, if there is a mistake that was made, it's what will you do differently next time? What did you learn from that? And moving forward like that. So that's kind of how I see coaching. There are therapists for therapy, and that's good and that's great. That's not how I see coaching. And I also don't see it as consulting where I'm telling people what to do and prescribing solutions for them. I feel like coaching works best when I ask the open-ended what and how type of questions, and they arrive at the conclusion themselves. They're more likely to own it. 70% of the time, the answer's in their head anyways. I just got to drag it out with some good questions. And that's kind of how I approach things.
Okay. There's something that you mentioned during your morning routine that I want to touch on a little bit more. So you mentioned writing. You mentioned writing for an hour. I'm sure they have questions in their head about that, about, where you find the time to do that. Is it worth it? And here's what I want to stress. I feel like a lot of business leaders talk about innovation all the time, especially C-suite. They're very quick to talk about processes, systems, building out elements of innovation. It's very rare that I hear a leader talk about internal creativity, how they get their mind in a creative state. So would you say that adopting a practice like writing every day has put you in a creative state of mind? And if so, how has that helped you as a coach?
You know what's crazy is I stumbled upon it by accident, and then I got validation by hearing a speaker talk about it at
Okay.
Vistage.
Okay.
So, yeah, I've always been sort of a creative sort, but the pandemic hit. My calendar cleared for a couple of weeks, like everybody's did, and I was feeling rather anxious, like everybody was with the uncertainty of everything. I'm a germaphobe on a good day, so throw a pandemic at me. I was like, oh, what's going to happen next? So, as I knew that when I would do something creative, I would get absorbed in it and get in the flow. And that got my mind off of things. And it usually set me up for success. And I also found it put me in a better mood, and I actually got energy from it. So I started writing fiction, and I wrote a fiction novel, and I don't have a degree in that. So I hired an editor to get better, and I read books on how to get better, and I got a lot of energy from it. So yeah, in the last 5 years, I've written 21 uh, novels. They're thrillers, crime thrillers, things like that. And here's what's happened. As things got busy, as the pandemic started to kind of lift, I, would continue to write in the morning and my close ratio went up as a salesperson. And then I heard a speaker talk about if you can start your day in the creative headspace, you can be 37% more productive. And I'm like 39. I did the math. So, yeah. And then here's something interesting. When I went to go build my first Vistage group as a Vistage chair, I got super duper busy and I started cutting things out of my morning routine. And I started to experience, I call them symptoms of burnout. I was getting, fatigued a lot earlier. I got colds. By the way, 10 years before the pandemic, I didn't even have a sniffle. And I started getting sick. And I would say inside of the first 8 months of building my group, I got sick 3 times.
Wow.
And I was just working long hours and everything else. Now, I processed an issue at Vistage Chair Academy, the training to be a chair, part 3. So I'd already been into it for a while. And I'd launched my group and everything else. And the person who processed the issue put me back onto my routine. And she actually made me text her every morning if I didn't do it. Or if I'm sorry, I had to text her every morning that I did do it, or she'd text me, with the question. So when I got back to it, I believe it or not, I added an hour to my morning routine. So I took away time that I was doing to do other things and I got better results. My
Wow.
membership growth had stagnated a little bit there for a couple of months, and I went back to my routine that was healthy and good for me and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, I've built 3 groups since doing that, and it was about a year ago this time when I started doing it. So I built 2 groups in the last year, and it took me 1 year to build one group before. So that starting the day in the creative headspace, it's almost like a meditation. I get into the flow very fast. And on Saturdays and Sundays, I probably do it like 3 hours in the morning, like 9 to noon. Here's what I've discovered. If I come in here fatigued, tired from something, and I sit down to write, I come out of the room with more energy. So it's feeding my soul in some way, but physically, I actually had more energy. So I've decided this has to be part of what I do every day. So I keep doing it.
Wow. Okay, there's a lot to unpack with what you said. So first, did you say that by starting your day in a creative headspace, you were 39% more productive? Is that what I
Yeah.
heard you say? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible. For anyone listening that they don't write, they have no desire to write, they hate the idea of writing, what could they swap in its place to still get in a creative headspace and experience the productivity outside of writing?
Oh, you can create anything. You can sit around and like redesign your home. What are some ideas you want to do something on the deck? What are some other stuff? You don't have to necessarily write a story. You could write out what you want to do next year. You could write out something that you want to tell your sister and you haven't been able to. You can do those types of things. When it comes to music, you can sit around and listen to music and getting creative in that way. You can meditate if you want, and by meditating you don't have to necessarily sit there with your legs crossed and hold your fingers together, but meditating can be as simple as closing your eyes, controlling your breath, and envisioning something else, envisioning what that talk's going to go like next week, envisioning like what the conversation with your dad's going to go like on Tuesday, envisioning what your spouse is going to think when you show her that gift, whatever it could be. That's all a measure of creativity, and it all counts. A lot of the writing that I do, some of it's research, some of it's actually writing, some of it's editing, some of it's thinking about the next chapter. So sometimes I'm sitting here for 20 minutes just like thinking about stuff. And by the way, when I get stuck, physical activity unsticks it. So after writing comes exercise. I solve all the plot holes in all my books when I'm 5 miles from the house without a pen. And then I have to repeat it to myself as I run back to the house to jot it down. So
That's
physical
awesome.
activity is also shown. Physical activity takes time, it takes effort, but it's shown brain chemistry wise to really help the body as well as the mind. So
Wow.
they say when people who, as we get older, the folks that stay younger, it's like, they're exercising and doing stuff. That's true, but they're also doing stuff, whether it be Sudoku, whatever. If you're doing mental exercise and physical exercise, they feed off one another and you're more likely to be healthy longer.
That's a really good point. Really good point. Thanks for sharing that. I do want to talk a little bit about Vistage. You mentioned Vistage a couple times. So, for anyone not familiar with Vistage, how would you describe that organization and what are some benefits to members?
Oh, wow. So Vistage is probably one of the original CEO peer advisory groups. I think they've been around now for 68 years. We'll get 12 to 16 CEOs from non-competing industries together every month. Non-competing is important because people will go deep. They will talk about confidential things. They'll share their balance sheet, trade secrets, all that stuff. And the beauty of a peer advisory group is the person sitting next to you has no agenda other than your success. So they can share ideas, they can pressure test problems specific to their industry or not. Guaranteed there's somebody in the room that's been through it. Guaranteed there's somebody in the room who's going to go through it in 3 years. And now they know what to do because they were in the room that day. So it's a great way to learn. Peer learning is huge. And we like to say, we call it isolation relief. It's lonely at the top if you're a business owner. And this is a place for you to sit with like-minded folks who are in similar situations to share ideas. My job as the chair to make sure I assemble the best people possible. Those who have high integrity, humble-hearted, willing to give to get, all those things. And that creates the environment for that to take place. And then I've been trained on issue processing, so to help facilitate issues so they can get the pay dirt and decision acceleration, we call it. So you can make better decisions as a leader, get better results, all those things. So I've been a part of it myself. Now as a chair, it's the most rewarding work I've ever done in my career.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So to anyone listening that has any interest in a peer advisory group, one of the books that I think speaks really well to this, one of my favorite books, Atomic Habits by James Clear. Incredible what he talks about getting in certain environments, just being in a culture of individuals that are hungry, they're thirsty for growth. They desperately want to grow, they want to expand, they want to make a difference, they want to help people, they want to bring in as much profit as possible. You need to get around peers that are like-minded, going in the same direction. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. I
Yeah,
highly recommend that book. Yeah.
if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, and you should be in a room full of people who challenge you to be better. Direct quote from one of my last meetings. This guy's going on and on about this guy on the board who's giving him a hard time, and that's called venting. And then the guy sitting next to him turns to him and says, "How much of what you just said is true, and how much of that did you make up?" And he's like, "About half." And they're like, "Okay, so now we know." But they're there to challenge each other. And let's face it, if you're paying an accountant or a lawyer for their advice, which I love my accountant and my lawyer, but there's a vendor relationship there. But these folks and people who work for you, they may or may not give it to you straight. The CEO sitting next to you will. And that's what I like about it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good point. I appreciate you sharing that. So, speaking of books, going back to your books, question for you, because you did mention that you completed 21 books. That's astounding. Most people can't even write one book in their entire life, but to accomplish 21, is there any kind of system that you might have built out where there's a certain thing that you work on, maybe you build out characters first and then you figure out how the timeline's going to go? Like, is there anything specific that you could say, this is a 3-part process, or this is what I work on first to get this piece in place before building out the rest of the puzzle?
Every book usually starts with a concept of some kind. So it could be the unreliable narrator. It could be all about irony. It could be the everyday person stuck in incredible circumstances and obstacles they have to overcome. And then how can I make that really fun and nail biting for everybody who's reading along? A couple of the books have a little bit of my past in there just because, they say, write what you know. So there's a book in there about a struggling musician in the 80s. That's fun. There's one about a headhunter in the 90s. That's fun. It's called The Headhunter Confidential. And there's also one about an outplacement consultant in the middle of the recession. So there's some things that go on there. Now, I fictionalized some of the stuff there. Some of the stuff that takes place in the book 100% happened to me just as they're written. Other of the stuff, though, I had to make it more exciting. I had to up the stakes. I've never
Sure.
been caught between the FBI and the Philadelphia mob, so that's good. But it sure did make for more interesting reading.
That's amazing. Awesome. All right, so let's talk about a little bit more about creativity, because you mentioned the music piece. So take us back to teenage David. Okay, so you're a teenager. What are you thinking? What do you think your life is going to entail? What do you think you're going to be doing? Take us back to that moment. Is it music?
Yeah. So I was the black sheep. I have two older sisters. They're super accomplished. Dad was a doctor, mom's a nurse. Oldest sister runs the ER at Stanford University Hospital. The middle sister is a divisional CFO at a pharmaceutical company, got her MBA from Wharton. And when I was 15 years old, Thanksgiving, my grandfather was visiting and he turned to me and he's like, "So what are you gonna do?" And I'm a fair bit younger than them. They're like 13 months apart. And I'm like, I'm going to be a rock star. And he turns to my mother and he's like, "He'll grow out of it." And I had hair. So by the time I was 17 or 18, the hair was getting there. By the time I was 20, it was halfway down my back. I took 2 years off between high school and college to tour with my rock band. I was a full-time musician making money that way. Had a couple albums out on a local independent label based out of Philadelphia back in the day. The first two were on cassette. That tells you how long ago it was. Album three, we actually got out on CD. Um, the kids listening to this are like, "What's a CD?" But so yeah, that was a big part of how I saw myself, how I identified. I would come home from school, go right to my room and write, write, write. I would write songs and write lyrics, and I have copyrights in over 500 songs. I was a creative force. A lot of my songs were story songs, which probably led into other stuff later. But and I did everything I could to get in front of people and play. And so yeah, music was a big part of my life as a teenager. It's how I thought my life was going to go, and it did sort of go that way till maybe early mid 20s.
Wow. Okay. So you and we've interacted numerous times. About a month ago, I've seen your work. I've seen how you engage with your members, and I noticed just the sheer amount of empathy that you have. I don't know how much you might realize this, but you have an abundance of empathy. Do you think, for whatever reason, music based on getting different songs out? Because a lot of music that I hear there's elements of a journey, of pain, of experience. Do you think that being as involved in music as you were positioned you to be a more empathetic person?
That's an interesting thought. My mom would tell you that I was the sensitive one of the three kids, and I was the boy. So maybe that's reversed. I don't know. Maybe those are roles in society that are no longer there. I don't know. But I do remember I got teased a lot because of it. But you know, I would write songs often about how I felt. It was a great opportunity to wallow when you're a teenager. But as I got older, I started writing more story songs, and those were made up. And it was putting myself in different situations, or my friends were going through things. So I'd write a song about that almost for them. And I think maybe that's a way to relate to people.
Hmm.
When I would compose like a guitar solo, it was always about how it felt, not how it sounded. Does this fit the mood? And that may go back to the way I was taught how to write songs. So I had this fantastic guitar teacher, Chet Mikowski, if he's out there somewhere. Uh, when we started writing songs, he's like, "So here's all the chords in A minor, put them in order." And I put them in order. And he's like, "What's this chord progression feel like?" And I'm like, "This feels kind of sad." And he's like, "All right, start humming, hum a tune." And I did. And he's like, "All right, there's your melody. Now go home and write some lyrics that fit this mood." So we started with moods first. And then as I progressed, it's like I wrote lyrics and I'm like, "Oh, I got to write the music to this because this is crazy." So, and I wrote, rock and roll music and all kinds of stuff, but I think you have to put yourself in another human's head for what they're hearing, not just in, and when I say that, I wasn't writing songs to, for people like, "Oh, I want to be a big hitster" or something like that. I was writing songs and I listened to it. I write songs and I write books that I like to listen to and like to read. So I feel like if you can put yourself in the reader's mindset or in the listener's mindset, that will determine the quality that you turn out. Because if something isn't up to snuff, well, then no, we got to go back and fix it and make it better. And I'm all about constantly improving. And I think that helped me as a professional. But as far as empathy is concerned, I'm always putting myself in the other person's shoes. How's this going to land for them? And I find that in my coaching too. Sometimes I have to ask the difficult question. You can word the difficult question better. If I ask somebody, "Well, why'd you do that?" They're going to get defensive and feel put on their heels and going to feel judged. But if I say, "What about that's important?" It's the same question worded differently, but it makes it about the thing. So I'm always thinking about how it's going to land for somebody else. And maybe that did start with music, anticipating what the listener would experience.
Wow. Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning starts with a mood. That's so important because we have to understand the different mood that other people have too. And you express that, right? How does that person that you're sharing something with, that message with, how are they feeling? How can you connect with them? So I really appreciate that. Talk to us about life on the road. I think that's really intriguing. I think a lot of people, when they were teenagers, might have dreamt of being a rock star and the fame and the fortune. Give us the good, bad, and ugly with that. What is it truly like on the road?
So here's what's interesting about that. I love writing music. I love recording music. I enjoyed performing it most of the times, except when I sounded terrible. Um, what got me though was the travel. So as a musician starting out, I traveled everywhere. And then in business, I was a headhunter and I did a lot of retained executive search. Well, retained search was all in person. So I spent the better part of 17 years, 3, 4 days a week on a plane because I was always interviewing C-level people and it always had to be face to face. So I lived on planes on an airport food for a while. And I'll be honest with you, by the time I hit like 37, which was not yesterday, I just got tired of that. And I kind of like being grounded now. And I've become what I call a fragile traveler. If you ask me to stay at a Motel 6, it's like, oh, we're camping, that kind of thing. So I've gotten used to different things and I will always try to fly first class because I'm a big guy and I like having room for my legs. So, and maybe it's because of all those years of, taking the red eye from all these different places. So the getting there part of it wasn't as enjoyable as being there part of it. And that goes in business and in music and all that stuff. Once I was there, I was fine. It was the journey. And what's funny about that is I love driving. I love driving. I have a convertible, put the top down. I will cruise for the sake of cruising. And I did that on my motorcycle for years and all sorts of other stuff. I love that. But when it came like traveling to get to a destination to do something, I'm like, oh my gosh, can we just get there already? So, and that may be something that's emerged as I've gotten older. But life on the road as a musician, you better like who you're with. That's a big part of it. Habits become a very, very important thing, and making sure you know yourself. So I knew like I can forget to eat, so I would bring food along. I knew that I never would drink enough water and I'd get headaches by the end of the day, and I was always shocked. So I had to make sure of that. So if you know yourself real well, that's helpful. Back in those days, I hated shaving, but sometimes there'd be photo shoots. So, you don't buy one of those crappy disposable razors at Thrift Drug and then cut up your face before a photo shoot kind of thing. So there was all those things. So I got better at anticipating stuff because I was very reactive and responsive as a younger person. And I probably to some degree still am. But boy, when we travel with my wife, she literally prints out a list of all the things she has to pack. I will invariably forget something. It's usually not something tragic. It's contact lens fluid or something I can get at the drugstore wherever I go. But she doesn't forget anything because she prints out. She goes, "Why don't you print out a list?" I'm like, "Because I'd have to make the list, and where's the fun in that?" So I did learn just more about. I learned more about myself and being true to myself because there are just things that I would do knowing I didn't like it. And as I've gotten older, it's like I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I can relate to elements of what you're saying. So I've had difficulty sleeping for quite some time. There's some nights it's good and some nights it's really bad. And
Yeah.
I've read a lot about how to sleep. I've been to sleep specialists. Sleep deprivation's no joke. I actually went 5 nights once without sleeping, and it was hell. It was
Oh,
horrible,
yeah.
absolutely horrible. It really plays mental tricks on you when you get a few nights of no sleep. So I discovered for me, I really, really like Courtyard by Marriott's beds. They have beds that I for whatever reason, their pillows and beds I really like. So every time I travel, I try to go to Courtyard by Marriott. And I remember there were numerous occasions I wake up because a lot of the hotel rooms look the same. I'd wake up and I'd be thinking to myself, what city am I in?
Yeah.
Like
Where am I? Yeah.
exactly like I literally have no idea where I am, and I had to check the calendar on my phone to tell me what city, what city I was in. And there was this one moment in 2023. I'll never forget it. It was August 20th of 2023. I had a major nervous breakdown due to travel because, like you were saying, 3 planes a week. time zone hop to time zone hop to time zone hop. I got home and I remember laying on my couch and just not being able to get up. And this happened for it was like 2 or 3 days where I was on my couch. I went up to use the bathroom and then I went right back on the couch, and my mind was just completely fried. I
Yes.
broke and I was like, I cannot travel at this pace anymore. I love travel. I love doing the workshops that I do. There's so much joy that I get out of it, but something needs to change. Something needs to tweak. I need to do this better. So was there a moment for you, maybe it was travel during what you were doing with music, where you recognized I need to transition into something else? Was that business? Did you know right away that you wanted to dive from the music world into business? Or was there like an aha moment where you stepped back and you said, you know what? Something needs to give, something needs to change.
Yeah. And by the way, you're right. Sleep's a real thing. And I remember I used to leave my watch set on Philadelphia time, and the phone would, of course, adjust. But I left my watch because I could be like, I gotta go to bed, that kind of thing. That usually helped. But yeah, so yeah, and here's the funny part. I discovered these things about myself. I didn't know them. Like I didn't know that I wasn't crazy about travels. Travel sounded exciting. Like, oh, I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go there. And if you ever want to tick off an audience full of people at your concert, say thank you, Boston, when you're in Providence. So, and I'm like, oh, Boston was last night. So, yeah, but you know, in more than one way, by the way. So not just music to business, but also when I got rid of my search firm and when I got out of executive search, it was because of things like travel. And if you want to talk about two cutthroat businesses, the music business and executive search, because it's all about cash and everything else like that. So yeah, with music, it kind of happened to me and I allowed it to.
Mm.
My drummer had passed away. He had cancer at a very young age. Bass player left and joined a blues band in Kentucky, and me and the guitar player did the coffee house scene. And we were playing this one gig one night, and the Flyers were in the playoffs. And I'm in the middle of singing a song, and this guy got checked against the boards really hard, and I'm in the middle of the song, and I'm like, oh, like that. I was watching the game. I was phoning it in. It was so fun. And afterwards, the guitar player's like, can I ask you a question? And yeah, he's like, why are you doing this? I'm like, because everybody expects me to. And he's like, wrong answer. And I was like, huh. So I took 2 years off and focused on my day job. And let's face it, I just started an executive search at the time. And what's the old joke? What do you call a guitar player without a girlfriend? Homeless. So you all have to have a day job. And I started making better money. And I moved out and got my own place. I was literally living in my mom's basement before that was popular. And so I got my own place and was doing that. And I'd done that for years. And then it's like I have my own retained search firm, and I had a bad week. I flew from Chicago to home. I interviewed a guy in Chicago, and I'm typing up the report on the plane and everything else like that. When I landed, I interviewed him for the wrong job. And here's the thing, it didn't matter. If you're good at executive search, you're a specialist in something. You're not learning anything new. You're just moving chess pieces from one company to the next. So I called him up and said, hey, it's not Long Island, it's Boston. Is that cool? And he's like, yeah, it's fine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm 37 years old. I haven't learned anything new in 7 years. I've peaked. This is bad. And then the next day, I went to take my car in because the lease was up. Now, cars are the only place in my life I'll spend more money than I should. I'm a car freak. So I had this really awesome car, and I took it back to the dealer for after a 3 year lease. This is the next day after this thing just happened. And the salesman looks at the odometer and he's like, there's 4,300 miles on the car. Is everything okay with it? And he goes, yeah, the car's fine. There's something wrong with me. All I do is drive to the airport and back. And then Monday, one of my biggest competitors who I like and respect, he would call me every year and say, we should merge, we should merge. He called me that Monday and said, we should merge. I said, how about you buy me out instead?
Hmm.
And that's what started that. So I just knew I was like, I'm kind of done here. I need to be learning new stuff all the time. That wasn't happening. I was sick of eating airport food all the time. It was messing with my system. It was messing with my sleep. I was making a lot of money and I was super successful and well respected. I was bored out of my mind. And that really helped me make that change.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate the vulnerability. So you had mentioned to me 3 times CEO, Is there anything that stays with going from a CEO of one company to the next? Is there anything that's been your guiding light, or any values or principles or systems, or anything that you would say that, success over here, you'll still be successful in a completely different industry too? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, being open to new experiences and being thirsty for knowledge has always been a big thing for me. So whatever job changes you've gone through and different things, like I've been a hired gun CEO, I've been the startup guy. Um, and even when I went to work for Vistage headquarters for a short time where I recruited chairs, I just remember there was so much to learn. They had a lot of systems and processes and stuff. And my attitude was, after a very short training and I really didn't know what I was doing, I was like, well, let's break some eggs and make an omelet. And I just dove in. And that attitude of just being willing to dive in and try. Because here's the thing, if your attitude is one of learning and wanting to do better and take chances, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be embraced, and they'll go, hey, you're doing this wrong. And they'll tweak your performance along the way. But the attitude, the self starter part, you can't manufacture that. You have it or you don't. And I've always been a self-starter. So I've always tackled stuff and just gone head in and like, let's do it. Let's figure it out. Like I never wrote a book before. I decided, well, I'm 50 years old, time to start writing a book. And I went and I took classes and I hired an editor, which really helped me do stuff. And I read books about writing. I'm pointing at them over on my desk there. Um, all those things to get educated because, somebody once said you use a lot of gerunds. I'm like, what's a gerund? I don't know this stuff. I didn't take this in college. And turns out it's words with ing on it. But anyways, that attitude of diving in and just immersing yourself and being open to new experiences, being open to being wrong, being open to be redirected. If you have a good attitude and you're a self-starter, people around you, whether they're underneath you or above you, usually embrace that attitude and they want to harness it. And it's never done me wrong. I've never had anyone say, hey, dude, calm down, get out of here. I can't take that. I've always had people go, oh, let's channel that in this direction. And being willing to make mistakes to learn is not a bad thing. I had this great boss at Vistage. His name was Todd Lingle, if Todd's listening. Todd told me, he's like, I want you to come up with 4 game-changing ideas every year. Only one of them has to work. And it got me swinging for the fences. And some of my ideas were stupid. And some of them Vistage still uses because I went through the selection process as a chair. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I recognize that. So attitude is everything. I don't know how else to say it. It sounds really general to say it that way, but attitude is everything.
So I feel like attitude, self-starter, grit, those kinds of ideas, I feel like a lot of that comes from our early childhood or something in our background that prompted that perseverance, whether it was sports, music, touring on the road, whether it was getting frustrated with airport food and now you've got to go figure something else out, right? But what if someone is much older listening to this episode and maybe they didn't have that spark of grit, maybe they weren't able to witness their parents have that drive, and maybe they don't have a good attitude, maybe their team is flustered, they're burned out, they're frustrated with leadership. What would you recommend someone who didn't have that background, didn't have that upbringing? What would you recommend that they would do to get in a better state of mind and have a better attitude?
The best thing I could think of is ask yourself, what can I do? Um, what's the next step? Those types of things, because we control what we control. Like I can control my attitude and I can control how I respond to things. I really can't control what so and so does. And you ever heard of they call it locus of control. There's internal locus of control and external. So external locus of control is blaming all the stuff and everything outside of you. I was late today because it rained. I was late today because there's traffic. So in my first day job when I was 18 years old as a musician, I worked as a bank teller. Imagine that with hair halfway down my back. And they really had banker hours. I could actually make gigs on time if I settled my drawer by 3:15. So I was late all the time because I hated that job. And they probably knew it on some level. I was actually good at it because I didn't want to do a bad job, but I was late all the time. And every day it rained, traffic was bad. My mom did something, whatever. I always had an excuse. And my boss looked at me and she said, I'm going to say two words to you that are going to change your life. And I'm like, okay. She's like, leave earlier. It's in my control. And when I own that, that's all I can do. So if you're in a bad situation today, if you're 55, 35, whatever, you're at a bad company surrounded by bad people, what can you do? What can you control? And you know what? Here's the thing. You can make some effort, might become contagious, good for you, might realize you're not where you need to be. Or you might realize like, hey, if I can do this, this, and this, my little area is more tolerable. It's better. Either way, you're bound to be happier and more satisfied. If you keep putting things on other people, like heaven forbid expectations, most people in life are like strife between couples, strife between friends, strife between coworkers usually has something to do with expectations. So expect more of yourself. And that can be including expect how you're going to respond to things when things don't happen the way you want. All those things. If you can start anticipating that and control what you can control, it's a start. And you're either going to realize you're in the wrong place, you need to go somewhere else, or things weren't as bad as they were, or things start to improve a little bit. And well, that's not a bad thing either. Either way, if you turn it on yourself and go, what can I do? Things are bound to get even a little bit better, hopefully a lot better.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for this conversation today, David. I really appreciate your time. There's three specific things I'm going to take away from this discussion today. One, you talking about getting your mind in a creative state, starting the day off in a creative headspace. You mentioned it leads to 39% more productivity. That is definitely something people should take a good look at. I think that was a really good point that you had mentioned. The second is you said starts with moods. You were talking about songwriting, starts with
Mhm.
moods. I think there's really good advice. Often I share something that I mentioned, emotion is foundation, right? It's the foundation upon which great stories stand. And it's important to ask yourself, how does your team feel? How do your clients feel? And then build stories surrounding that. It sounds like you had a similar process with songwriting. And then the third and final piece is what you recently mentioned, which is that external locus of control. You mentioned blaming everyone and everyone else, everything else for someone's issues. You said you have to own what's in your control. That's so powerful. It's a great place to start. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. If people want to get more information on what you do, they want to reach out to you for your coaching services, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We have a website. It's called Nast Partners. Um, and on LinkedIn, I think I'm under David B. Nast on LinkedIn. You can call me Dave. But yeah, those are probably the best places to go.
Perfect. I will include that in the show notes. People could just click and go from there. Thanks again. Really appreciate your time.
Matt, thank you. I enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you found this discussion helpful, please leave a review since positive reviews help others find these conversations. New episodes drop regularly, so stay tuned. And remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to take action, you must share more stories.